There is no companion chapter to this module in the textbook, although the authors make a point of adding sidebars throughout most chapters that include social work considerations on each topic. Something I like a lot about this textbook is that they do include that kind of information. This module delves into how public libraries address social issues like housing insecurity, poverty, addiction, library services to the incarcerated. It also includes concepts like equity, diversity, inclusion, sustainability, and community engagement. So let's get started.
Here's a quote from an article in Public Library Quarterly, Top 10 Challenges Facing Public Libraries. It says, libraries have successfully transformed themselves from being chiefly about materials to being community anchors for formal and informal learning, technology access, workforce development, and community engagement. I would suggest that all of those things come with social issues that we will go through throughout the rest of this program, and that we can serve people in all of these ways if we also keep the social science end of library science in mind. So let's talk about EDI, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Equity means equal access to information in all its forms. It means equal access to services, programs, technology, facility, basically all of the things that the library offers, right down to the building itself, must be equitable. Equal attention, accommodation, and service to all patrons. Here's some more information about all of this. Equity is not the same as equality. They are two different things. If you offer, for example, information via technology, you also have to provide that technology, or you're not creating equitable access to information. This applies to ADA compliancy, Americans with Disabilities Act. It applies to customer service, treating everyone the same, offering the same services to everyone. Think about how you treat, for example, loud teenagers in the library, or when young people ask about collections that we think of as adult services. If a young person asks you about magnifiers, for example, my library has a collection of circulating magnifiers. We shouldn't assume that because they are young and that service is really sort of marketed at seniors. But why? There are people who need magnification services, right? Who have visual disabilities at all ages. We should be encouraging kids of all ages to explore new technologies. Magnification services certainly fall into that. It makes them more open to people with visual disabilities, whether they have them themselves or not. But the idea of equitable service here is not assuming that because they are not the person that the service is marketed toward, that they have some sort of ill intent in mind. Same idea applies to adults in youth areas of the libraries. We sort of, I don't know, sometimes give the side eye to adults without accompanied minors who are just sort of wandering around a children's department. For safety purposes, for sure. We want to be aware of all adults in youth areas. But what if those adults are there because they have lower reading levels and they go there to get books to read? What if, they're there for services for their children or grandchildren who maybe aren't with them? They're exploring things the library has to offer. We can still greet them, we can acknowledge their presence for safety reasons without taking away their access to information and services they may legitimately need. Behavior policies create equity. Everyone has to behave in a way that doesn't impede anyone else's use of the library. So those are some ideas surrounding the idea of equity. Now let's talk about diversity. The idea that staff in a library represent their community. So data from 2017 at a website called datausa.io, and I've got a link to this, I think, in the module links. It says that 86% of librarians are white, 6% are black, 4% are Asian, 3% are biracial, 84% are female, 16% are male. There's already a problem with that because they didn't count non-binary. So this data is from 2017. It's flawed data already because all data is flawed to some extent. But that's pretty jarring, isn't it? 86% of librarians are white. When staff represent the community, they have a greater ability to understand and provide service to that community. On the other hand, a diverse staff who think diversely and represent different backgrounds won't fall prey to biases. They will, build collections and services and programs that are more diverse when they are more diverse. So the librarianship as an industry has a lot of work to do to come to this idea of diversity among staff and that staff represent their community. Library provides opportunities to expand worldview. The idea that we create, when we create programs and collections that represent different worldviews, different lifestyles, all kinds of different viewpoints, creates opportunities for people to learn about those things. If you serve a very diverse community, you want to make sure that all of those different worldviews are represented. If you work in a more homogeneous community, it's an opportunity for people to learn about different people and different ideas. So materials and programs should be diverse in viewpoints and subject coverage. And remember too that diversity means age, race, religion, language, gender expression, sexual orientation, physical ability, in a multitude of combinations. Diversity represents all of those different things. We want to talk about visibility. I said here visibility matters. Libraries can promote underrepresented, marginalized people, content, and authors. Don't limit displays to just heritage months. Black History Month is fantastic, but we want to have literature by and about Black people and other, cultural groups, other times of year, like all the time. All of our book lists, all of our displays should have diverse materials. We also want to celebrate those heritage months, of course, but we don't want to limit our displays and our programs and things to just those heritage months. We want to be diverse intentionally and always. We should do diversity audits of our collections, so to make sure that our programs and our materials are diverse. There's so much to say about this. I'm going to provide some resources toward the end of this presentation that give more reading. There's just so much, there's no way to do it in a quick overview.
So let's talk about inclusion. This includes our individual privilege and how it impacts people's ability to access library services. The library provides judgment-free spaces and barrier-free services. So think about things like going fine-free. Materials that have fines on them, libraries that charge late fees and things like that, are leaving people out who cannot pay those fines, and that's not very inclusive. I know there's probably groups doing papers and group projects about going fine-free, so I'll leave that example at that. But it's a good example of ways libraries can be more inclusive, is going fine-free. Before COVID, my library had a program for teens called the Inclusive Social Group. It was meant for all people, people with disabilities, people without disabilities, people who struggle to connect or make friends, and those who engage easily. It was an opportunity for us to be inclusive of all ability levels. There were trained teen peer mentors who ran activities. It was just a place to make friends and a safe environment to be inclusive to everyone. And a nice opportunity for very social and very friendly kids to experience different personality types and ability levels. So that's one more example of some barrier-free, judgment-free spaces. The link on this page goes to a page on the ALA site about hateful conduct in libraries and supporting library workers and patrons. It has 3 parts: proactive preparation, responding to an incident, and meeting community needs. So let me talk about those 3 things. Proactive preparation. What strategic steps can I take to prepare in the event that hateful conduct situations occur within the library? That's what being proactive is about. Responding to an incident. What do I do if hateful conduct is directed at me, a colleague, or a patron? How do I follow up? What do I do? And then meeting community needs is, how do I balance access to all viewpoints while also identifying and supporting historically marginalized perspectives? This toolkit on hateful conduct is very helpful in helping libraries respond to incidents of hateful conduct. The idea we talked about in the professional ethics module about whether libraries are or can be neutral applies here again. The ways in which libraries choose to respond to hateful conduct, and that could be deciding whether hate groups can use library meeting rooms, curating and balancing collections from specific types of sources, and prioritizing diversity and inclusion over exclusion, are directly related to whether a library tries to be neutral or more intentional about excluding hateful conduct. Sustainability was discussed in the Libraries as Place module, but it's also a social issue, so I'll address it here again. ALA's Center for the Future of Libraries, which is a fantastic source to include in your final paper for this class about library trends, has a list of trends in libraries, and many of them are concerned with sustainability. Ideas like community resilience, collective impact, and the sharing economy are a few examples. Sustainability also applies to services and programs. Services that do not burden the earth, like not using plastic bags for customers or providing reusable bags for customers. We also always want to use materials and supplies for programs that are biodegradable. That is easier said than done. Once plastic supplies are in your supply stash, reusing it is better than putting it back into the environment by throwing it away. But as you purchase new supplies for program use, try to buy items that don't burden the earth, that are reusable, biodegradable, sustainable. We want programming that is sustainable. We want refreshments that don't require plastic to serve. We want to provide electronic access to our program handouts rather than paper. Programs and services that are sustainable from a service perspective as well. Will you be able to continue offering them if you have a change in staffing? What skills are needed to provide programs and services, and how will you ensure that staff have those skills so that you can continue to provide those programs and services into the future? Community resilience is about providing programs and services as solutions for things like food insecurity, energy inequity, disaster preparedness. The library can be a place of shelter. That's how the library provides community resilience in terms of sustainability. At the very end of the semester, there's a module about global perspectives that talks about sustainable development goals. The United Nations partners with libraries to provide globally sustainable programming and services for people. When we get to that module, it'll talk a lot about sustainable development goals and how they relate to all those library sustainability efforts, but on a global scale. Civic engagement is the act of participating in activities to improve the quality of life in a community and address social issues. The ALA had an initiative a few years ago called Libraries Transform that was all about civic engagement. The idea was that libraries have resources and programs and services and empower patrons to learn and to take action to better their communities. There are grants for libraries who work with community partners to address social issues to better their communities. There are grants for summer lunch programs for students who aren't getting that service at school during the summer. There are grants for embedding social workers into library services. There are grants for creating hygiene kits or hiring mobile hygiene units for those experiencing homelessness. There are grants for installing Narcan vending machines for opioid overdoses. There are grants for offering skills programming for previously incarcerated community members so that they can build job skills. The ALA Center for Civic and Community Engagement has a toolkit with links to active library programs, training, resources, and non-library associations with civic engagement programs that libraries can partner with. The Skokie Public Library in Illinois has a civic lab with information and activities and programs for discussion on issues facing the community. My current boss was actually part of the group that created that concept at Skokie years ago and is still going strong there. All of this is to demonstrate that libraries can be a strong part of helping communities help themselves by encouraging civic engagement.
We couldn't talk about social issues without talking about the opioid epidemic and how it has affected libraries. I have 2 links here. There's a whole Facebook group about libraries and the opioid crisis. Of course, my favorite, Web Junction, has a whole section on resources, data, how libraries can respond to the opioid crisis. There's a whole idea around librarians administering Narcan and naloxone to reverse overdoses when they happen in the library. Having needle disposal containers in library bathrooms. This keeps, needles out of the environment. Denver actually hired peer navigators. These are people in recovery or who have experience that can hand off victims to social services because people are more likely to accept help when it comes from someone who's been in that position. Training staff to identify when people need help. That's part of it, is just knowing when your patrons need help, identifying it, giving SHARPS training on handling needles, and then, of course, connecting drug users with resources, not just kicking them out of the library. There's a lot of training and reading that librarians can do to be familiar with the opioid epidemic and to understand how we can recognize when people need help and what we can do. Housing insecurity is definitely a social issue, right? If you've never seen the movie The Public, I encourage you to watch it. It's just fantastic. Housing insecurity for libraries, the Library Connection is about connecting with community partners that work with the unsheltered. Having a social worker on site is something that a lot of urban libraries have done. Putting bins in the parking lot or the lobby for personal effects, so that people who have bedrolls and shopping carts and luggage, they can't bring all that stuff into the library, at least not easily. Giving them a place to put it on library, property, a bin in the parking lot, a bin in the library, where they can feel safe putting their personal items in these bins that are secure, so that they can still use the library and not have to lug all that stuff around and still know that it won't get stolen. A really cool service that a lot of urban libraries are offering are mobile shower units. These are literally trucks that roll up to your parking lot. They have shower units inside them. They're completely private. Maybe the library can pay for the service. Maybe they can partner with different community partners that can help pay for the service. But this is so that people aren't trying to shower in a library bathroom sink. They get to keep their dignity and get a real shower in a private setup, a safe environment. It's really kind of a cool service that libraries can offer to the housing insecure. We want to talk about behavior-based responses, not situation-based. This is teaching librarians, we don't just kick people out of the library because they look like maybe they are housing insecure, right? If they are not meeting the behavior policy, that's situation-based. So we don't respond to things just because it looks like somebody's in a bad spot, right? We respond to behavior, not situation. Being welcoming may open the unsheltered to accepting social services. When we welcome people into the library, which is a place of refuge for the marginalized, right? It's a place of information gathering and sharing. When we welcome people who need that information and who need that shelter, into the library, they are more accepting of social services. And keeping in mind that housing insecurity is not a library problem, it's a community problem that the library can help alleviate. There is a link there to ALA's resources for public libraries serving people experiencing homelessness.
The ALA Center for the Future of Libraries, which I mentioned previously, also has information about how libraries serve people experiencing poverty. Their trends page includes topics like basic income and income equality that are worth a look, and I'll link to those in the module. Libraries can offer free lunches in the summer, which I mentioned before, when kids are out of school. Libraries can be a part of the solution to poverty. Even if they're not traditionally library services, if libraries can be a part of the community conversation to find out what needs to be done to help people experiencing poverty, there might definitely be things we can provide. If we have meeting spaces where free lunches can be provided by the organization in the community that provides the lunches, the library doesn't necessarily have to provide the lunches. Maybe we can just offer the space for it. Michigan Bridges is the organization in Michigan that provides help for people paying their bills. They provide bridge cards, which cover the cost of groceries and other approved expenses like utility bills. Libraries can become partners with Michigan Bridges to help people use computers to apply for bridge cards. There are specially trained counselors who can actually help people fill out the forms. Libraries have a different role in simply providing free computers and meeting spaces for the applicants and their counselors or social workers. We can help people use the computers and navigate the website, the technology, without necessarily offering, advice on what information to include on the form. We offer the same basic tech support to bridge card applicants as we would to any other computer user. Library services to the incarcerated is another social issues libraries face. Book banning is a serious issue in public libraries. They have strict rules about what prisoners can read and have access to. I've linked to an article in The Guardian in the module all about this. There is also a situation where prison libraries require prisoners, in some cases, this is not always true, but require prisoners to pay for access to library materials, sometimes by the minute, databases and things like that. You can see how this is an issue for those who are doing legal research or who are trying to obtain GEDs or even college degrees, or trying to keep their job skills up to date so that they are employable upon their release. I've linked in the module to various resources that you can browse through, like The Prisoner's Right to Read, a live guide on prison libraries from the ALA, and to the Office of Correctional Education. Whole person librarianship is about giving librarians the tools to foster empathy and understanding in ourselves and our communities, and teaching librarians basic social work approaches to help our patrons. Not all libraries can afford to embed licensed social workers into their services, and sometimes those are the communities where the help is the most needed. Rather than abandon folks who need help, this is an approach to giving librarians something to work with, some skills to employ to help their communities. Many argue that librarians are not social workers. We do not have the skills and we are not prepared to deal with social work situations. Whole person librarianship is a compromise, understanding that we are not social workers and we aren't trying to be, but that we can be more helpful and more prepared for social work situations if we have some training. Trauma-informed care teaches us to treat people experiencing social issues, anything from abuse to poverty to housing insecurity, as people first, and to use person-first language, because people are not their experience. They are not poor people, homeless people, addicted people. They are people experiencing those things. They are people first and their situation last. Trauma-informed care is the idea that social issues are a result of trauma and that we don't want to cause them further trauma. It also takes a strengths-based perspective in which every person's strengths are identified and leveraged to help make change in their lives. It sees social issues as a system issue rather than an individual issue, and encourages compassion for those experiencing the downfalls of the system. We don't judge people for the situation they are in. We do what we can to build them back up. Trauma-informed care focuses on behavior, just as I said earlier. We don't kick people out of the library because they are homeless. We may kick them out for behavior issues. Behaviors are challenging. Individuals are not. And as I said earlier, if we create welcoming spaces for everyone, we create a space where everyone can benefit from our work. It ensures we don't add further trauma and welcomes people who need help into spaces where that help is available. So in conclusion, here are some of the things we covered in this lecture. Public libraries are community anchors in which equity, diversity, and inclusion are part of our mission. They are core values. We talked about hateful conduct in libraries and how we balance access to all viewpoints while also identifying and supporting historically marginalized perspectives. We dug into more ideas around sustainable services, buildings, and programming. Libraries can encourage civic engagement by offering services and programs that help communities identify and solve community issues. We discussed ways in which libraries can contribute to the opioid epidemic, housing insecurity, and poverty. Library services to the incarcerated were also considered, including concepts like book banning and prisoners' right to read. And then we talked about whole person librarianship and trauma-informed care that are social work techniques that librarians can employ to help connect people experiencing social issues or trauma with social services. This was heavy concepts this week, so thanks for participating and have a good week, everybody.